The Sunday morning sun hit the industrial district of Atlanta with a brutality that seemed almost personal. No clouds offered mercy, no breeze provided relief. The temperature had already climbed past 80 degrees by 9 in the morning, and the concrete and steel of the abandoned West Side manufacturing zone radiated heat like an open furnace. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stepped out of her unmarked vehicle and immediately felt sweat forming along her hairline, her navy blue Atlanta PD uniform absorbing every punishing ray. Beside her, Max descended from the vehicle with the fluid grace that 7 years of service had perfected, his tan and black coat gleaming in the harsh light, his intelligent eyes already scanning the environment with professional intensity. The call had come in as a simple abandoned vehicle report. A jogger cutting through the old industrial corridor had spotted a car stopped in the middle of the Morrison Street Bridge, a rusting structure that had been closed to regular traffic for nearly a decade. The bridge connected two forgotten sections of what had once been Atlanta's manufacturing heart, now a graveyard of empty warehouses and crumbling factories, waiting for demolition or gentrification, whichever came first. Sarah had taken the call herself, a decision that would later seem like fate or perhaps something darker. She approached the bridge on foot, Max maintaining perfect position at her left side, his nails clicking softly against the cracked asphalt. The bridge stretched before them like a skeletal finger, pointing toward the abandoned Thornton chemical plant on the opposite bank. Rust had eaten through the guardrails in several places, leaving gaps that dropped 30 feet to the polluted waters of the old industrial canal below. And there, precisely in the center of the span, sat the vehicle that had prompted the call. It was a Tesla Model X, pearl white, gleaming incongruously against the decay surrounding it. The vehicle looked brand new, its paint unmarred, its windows tinted to legal limits. The falcon wing doors were closed, the vehicle apparently intact. But something about the scene made Sarah's instincts flare with warning. Cars did not simply stop in the middle of abandoned bridges. Cars did not park themselves in locations that required deliberate navigation through barriers and warning signs. And most importantly, cars did not make Max behave the way he was behaving now. The Belgian Malinois had stopped approximately 20 feet from the vehicle, his entire body rigid with an alertness that Sarah had learned to respect over years of partnership. His ears were pitched forward, his tail held straight, his focus absolute. But he was not assuming his typical alert posture for drugs or explosives. Instead, he was exhibiting something Sarah had rarely witnessed, a combination of aggression and fear that seemed to war within his disciplined frame. A low growl emanated from his chest, so quiet that only Sarah could hear it, a sound that communicated danger in a frequency meant only for her. She knelt beside him, placing one hand on his muscular shoulder, feeling the tension vibrating through his body like a live current. His eyes never left the vehicle, tracking it as if expecting it to move, to attack, to transform into something threatening. In all their years together, through drug busts and hostage situations, through manhunts and disaster responses, Sarah had never seen Max react to an inanimate object with such visceral intensity. She reached for her radio, her movements slow and deliberate, some primal part of her brain accepting that whatever Max sensed deserved respect. She called for backup and requested a technical team, citing suspicious circumstances without being able to articulate exactly what those circumstances were. Dispatch acknowledged, estimating a 20-minute response time for the specialized unit. Sarah settled into waiting, her hand never leaving Max's shoulder, her eyes fixed on the pristine vehicle that sat motionless under the merciless morning sun. The technical team arrived in a caravan of 3 vehicles, led by Sergeant Marcus Webb, a 15-year veteran of the department's Forensic Technology Division. Webb was a compact man with graying temples and the perpetually tired eyes of someone who had seen too many crime scenes reconstructed through digital evidence. He approached Sarah with a tablet already in hand, his team fanning out to establish a perimeter around the Tesla. "What do we have, Lieutenant?" Webb asked, his voice carrying the flat professionalism of someone who had learned to suppress curiosity until evidence warranted it. Sarah shook her head slowly, her eyes still on the vehicle. "I honestly do not know, Sergeant. The call came in as an abandoned vehicle. But something is wrong here. My K-9 will not approach it, and Max does not spook easily." Webb glanced at the Belgian Malinois, who had not relaxed his vigilant posture despite the arrival of additional personnel. The sergeant had worked enough cases with K-9 units to know that a dog's instincts often detected what human senses missed. He nodded slowly, gesturing for his team to proceed with caution. The next 30 minutes unfolded with methodical precision. Webb's team photographed the exterior from every angle, checked for obvious signs of tampering or explosive devices, and finally determined it was safe to attempt access. The Tesla's doors were locked, its windows impenetrable to casual observation. One of the technicians connected a diagnostic device to the vehicle's external port, bypassing the security protocols with practiced efficiency. The doors unlocked with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the industrial silence. The Falcon wings rose slowly, revealing an interior that was as immaculate as the exterior. Cream-colored leather seats showed no wear, no stains, no indication of use. The dashboard displayed a neutral welcome screen, awaiting input. There was no registration in the glove compartment, no personal items in the center console, no evidence that any human being had ever sat in this vehicle. But it was the black box that changed everything. Every autonomous vehicle manufactured after 2020 contained a comprehensive data recording system, colloquially known as a black box, despite its actual silver housing. This system recorded everything: navigation routes, speed data, sensor inputs, passenger presence, even audio from the cabin microphones. Webb's team extracted the data module with surgical care, connecting it to their mobile analysis station while Sarah watched with growing unease. Webb's face changed as the data began to populate his screen. The transformation was subtle at first, a slight tightening around his eyes, a compression of his lips. But within minutes, his expression had shifted to something Sarah recognized from her own mirror in the aftermath of the worst cases. The look of someone who had stumbled upon something that would haunt their dreams. "Lieutenant," Webb said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this." Sarah approached the mobile station, Max following close enough that his shoulder brushed her leg. The screen displayed a map of metropolitan Atlanta, overlaid with a complex web of route data. Hundreds of trips, maybe thousands, rendered as colored lines that crisscrossed the city in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Webb zoomed in on specific points, locations where the vehicle had stopped for extended periods, and Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. She recognized the first location immediately, the corner of Peachtree and Baker, the exact spot where Marcus Henderson's body had been discovered 14 months ago. Henderson had been a city councilman investigating corruption in the sanitation department. His death had been ruled a robbery gone wrong, despite the fact that nothing had been taken from his body. The case remained open, unsolved, quietly forgotten. Webb scrolled to another location, the parking lot behind the Fulton Industrial Boulevard warehouse district, where journalist Diana Reeves had been found in her car 8 months ago. Official cause of death was suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, though her family had never accepted that conclusion. Diana had been investigating illegal dumping operations connected to several prominent construction companies. A third location appeared on the screen, the jogging trail at Piedmont Park, where attorney William Chen had suffered a fatal heart attack 11 months ago. Chen had been representing whistleblowers in a case against a pharmaceutical company with deep political connections. The medical examiner had found nothing suspicious, though Chen had no history of cardiac problems. The locations kept coming, a dozen of them, then 24, each corresponding to deaths that had been classified as accidents, suicides, natural causes, or unsolved homicides. Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her feet as the pattern became undeniable. This vehicle had been present at the scene of numerous deaths spanning 18 months, deaths that had removed inconvenient people from positions where they threatened powerful interests. "How is this possible?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, despite the chaos erupting in her mind. A car cannot just drive itself to murder scenes without someone programming the destinations. Webb's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up additional data streams. "That is what makes this worse, Lieutenant. The navigation commands were not entered manually. They were transmitted remotely, using encrypted protocols that require specialized access." "What kind of access?" Webb hesitated, and in that hesitation Sarah saw the shape of the nightmare to come. "The encryption keys used for these commands are law enforcement grade, Lieutenant. Specifically, they match the protocols used by the Atlanta Police Department's automated vehicle monitoring system." The words hung in the air, like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything. Sarah stared at the screen, at the damning web of routes and locations, at the digital fingerprints that pointed directly at her own department. Someone within the Atlanta PD had been using this vehicle as a weapon, transporting killers, or perhaps killing directly, then using institutional access to ensure the crimes remained hidden. Max pressed closer against her leg, and Sarah realized she had been holding her breath. She exhaled slowly, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. If this information became public, it would destroy the department. Careers would end, prosecutions would follow, the entire institution would be tainted by association. But if it remained hidden, whoever was responsible would continue operating with impunity, protected by the very badge that was supposed to represent justice. "Sergeant Webb," Sarah said carefully, "I need you to secure this data with the highest level of encryption your system allows. I need copies made to external drives that we will secure independently. And I need you to log this discovery under a case number that does not yet exist in our system." Webb met her eyes, understanding flickering in his tired gaze. He recognized what she was doing, creating a parallel track of evidence that could survive if the official channels proved compromised. It was a dangerous game, the kind that ended careers or lives if played incorrectly. But Webb had seen the data. He knew what they were dealing with. "Understood, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "But you should know, the moment I access our systems to file even a preliminary report, whoever is monitoring will know we have found something." Sarah nodded. "Then we do not file anything yet. We work this off the books until we know who we can trust." The irony was not lost on her. A police lieutenant, sworn to uphold the law, was about to conduct an investigation that deliberately circumvented every protocol she had spent her career respecting. But the law meant nothing if those entrusted to enforce it had become the greatest threat to justice, and somewhere in the data streaming across Webb's screen was a trail that led to whoever had turned the Atlanta Police Department into an instrument of murder. The first 48 hours after the discovery tested every instinct Sarah had developed in 15 years of police work. She moved through her official duties like an actress performing a role she had rehearsed thousands of times, attending briefings, reviewing case files, conducting routine patrols. But beneath the surface, her mind worked constantly on the parallel investigation she had initiated with Webb's help. The technical sergeant had proven invaluable, his quiet competence and evident horror at their discovery making him a natural ally. He had created an isolated system, physically disconnected from the department's network, where they could analyze the Tesla's data without triggering alerts. Working in the early morning hours before his shift and late into the nights after his official duties ended, Webb had begun mapping the full scope of what they had uncovered. The vehicle's black box contained 18 months of comprehensive data. During that period, the Tesla had logged over 300 individual trips within the metropolitan Atlanta area. Most were innocuous, routine routes through commercial and residential districts that suggested normal vehicle testing or perhaps simple transportation. But 47 of those trips terminated at locations that corresponded to deaths, disappearances, or incidents that had attracted law enforcement attention. Webb had organized the incidents into categories, and the pattern that emerged was chilling in its precision. 14 deaths ruled as accidents or natural causes, all involving individuals who had been investigating or threatening powerful institutional interests. 11 disappearances, people who had simply vanished without explanation, their cases eventually going cold due to lack of evidence or resources. 8 incidents of evidence destruction, locations where fires, floods, or other disasters had conveniently eliminated documentation related to ongoing investigations, and 14 instances where the vehicle had been present at the homes or workplaces of potential witnesses who had subsequently recanted testimony or refused to cooperate with authorities. The autonomous car had been weaponized as a surveillance platform, a transport for assassins, and a tool for intimidation. Its self-driving capabilities made it perfect for such operations. No human driver to identify, no witnesses to the vehicle's presence, no trail of rideshare records or taxi receipts. The Tesla could navigate to any location, wait for any duration, and depart without leaving human evidence. Combined with remote access protocols that bypassed normal authentication, it represented the perfect instrument for invisible crimes. But the truly devastating revelation came when Webb analyzed the access credentials used to command the vehicle. The encryption protocols were not merely law enforcement grade. They were specifically tied to the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Sarah received this information in a secure location Webb had established, a storage unit on the outskirts of Decatur that he had rented under an assumed name. The space was cramped and sweltering despite a small portable air conditioner, but it was clean of surveillance and physically isolated from any network that could be monitored. Max lay in the corner on a folded blanket, his eyes tracking between Sarah and Webb with the patient attention of a guardian who sensed danger but could not identify its source. "Internal Affairs," Sarah repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "The division responsible for investigating police misconduct is the one conducting criminal operations." Webb nodded grimly. The access keys were generated using IA's master credentials. Now, that does not necessarily mean the entire division is compromised. These keys could have been stolen or copied, but whoever is using them has intimate knowledge of IA's systems and protocols. Sarah leaned back against the metal wall of the storage unit, feeling the heat seep through her uniform shirt. Internal Affairs was a fortress within the department, its operations compartmentalized specifically to prevent interference from officers who might be under investigation. If corruption had taken root there, it would explain why so many cases had been quietly closed, why so many inconvenient deaths had been ruled accidents, why so many witnesses had become unavailable. "Who runs IA currently?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Deputy Chief Raymond Cortez," Webb replied, "appointed 18 months ago by Chief Harrison. Before that, he ran the Organized Crime Task Force for 6 years. The timeline aligned perfectly. Cortez had assumed leadership of Internal Affairs at precisely the moment the Tesla's data began recording trips to crime scenes. Coincidence was possible, but increasingly implausible. Sarah felt the weight of the investigation shifting, the anonymous threat becoming concrete, acquiring a face and a name and a position of enormous power within the department. "We need more," she said finally. "This data shows correlation, but a defense attorney would tear it apart. We need direct evidence linking Cortez to these operations." Webb hesitated, his expression troubled. "Lieutenant, if Cortez is involved, he has access to everything. Every case file, every personnel record, every surveillance system in the department. The moment he realizes we are investigating, we become targets." Sarah looked at Max, who had raised his head at the tension in their voices. The Belgian Malinois met her eyes with the absolute trust that had defined their partnership. He would follow her into any danger, confront any threat, sacrifice himself without hesitation if she required it. That loyalty deserved to be honored with wisdom, not squandered on reckless action. "Then we work smarter," she said. "We identify potential allies, people who might have seen something suspicious but had no safe way to report it. We build our case piece by piece, staying below Cortez's radar until we have enough to take to someone outside the department." "Who outside the department?" Webb asked. "The FBI? The GBI? Any of them could be compromised too." Sarah had considered this problem extensively over the past 48 hours. Corruption rarely existed in isolation. The operations revealed in the Tesla's data suggested sophisticated planning and substantial resources. Cortez might be the internal contact, but he was almost certainly not operating alone. External partners, political connections, possibly federal law enforcement contacts of his own, any of these could turn a report to outside agencies into a death sentence. "There is one person," Sarah said slowly. "District Attorney Victoria Reese. She prosecuted a major corruption case 3 years ago that put 2 city commissioners in federal prison. She has a reputation for being untouchable, and she has never worked directly with Cortez's divisions." Webb's eyebrows rose. "The DA is a significant escalation, Lieutenant. If we go to her, we are committing to a path that cannot be reversed." Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words. Victoria Reese was known for her aggressive prosecution of public corruption, but she was also known for her absolute insistence on concrete evidence. Approaching her with speculation and circumstantial data would be worse than useless. It would alert the targets through the inevitable leaks that plagued every government institution, while providing ammunition to discredit any future investigation. "Not yet," Sarah agreed. "We need more. But keep her in mind as our endpoint. Everything we gather from this point forward needs to meet the standard she would require." The investigation settled into a dangerous rhythm over the following weeks. Sarah maintained her official duties while carving out time for clandestine work, a balancing act that left her exhausted and perpetually on edge. Max seemed to sense her tension, staying closer than usual during their shifts, his alert posture suggesting he was scanning for threats even when ostensibly relaxed. Webb's technical analysis continued to yield valuable intelligence. He had discovered that the Tesla was registered to a shell company called Horizon Automotive Research, which was itself owned by a web of holding companies that eventually traced back to a private equity firm based in the Cayman Islands. The corporate structure was deliberately impenetrable, designed to frustrate exactly the kind of investigation Sarah was conducting, but Webb had found one useful thread. Horizon Automotive Research maintained an office address in Atlanta, a suite in a commercial building on Peachtree Center Avenue. Sarah drove past the building 3 times over the course of a week, never stopping, never photographing, simply observing. The suite occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower that housed law firms, consulting companies, and corporate offices. It was the perfect location for a front company, anonymous among legitimate businesses, accessible without attracting attention. But on her 4th pass, Sarah noticed something that made her pulse quicken. A black SUV was parked in the building's underground garage, its license plate belonging to the Atlanta Police Department's motor pool. The vehicle was assigned to the Internal Affairs Division. She reported the observation to Webb during their next secure meeting, watching his face go pale as the implications registered. If IA vehicles were regularly visiting the shell company's office, the connection between Cortez and the Tesla operations became substantially more concrete. But photographing or surveilling the location would be extremely risky. The building's security systems would record any observation attempts, and if Cortez was monitoring for exactly such intrusions, Sarah would be exposed. There might be another way, Webb said thoughtfully. Horizon Automotive Research has to file certain documents with the state, corporate registrations, tax forms, that kind of thing. Most of it is public record, but the filing process creates metadata that is not publicly accessible. I know someone at the Secretary of State's office who might be willing to run some queries for us. Is this person trustworthy? Sarah asked. Webb's expression flickered with something that might have been old pain. She is my sister. She has been trying to convince me to leave the department for years, says she does not trust the people I work for. I think she would help us, especially if I explained why. Family connections introduced their own risks. But Sarah recognized that they had reached the limits of what they could accomplish alone. Every investigation required leverage points, people who could access information or resources that the investigators could not reach directly. Webb's sister represented one such point. The question was whether expanding their circle would strengthen the investigation or create vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Talk to her, Sarah decided, but give her the minimum information necessary. If she asks why you need corporate metadata, tell her you are working on a case you cannot discuss. Do not mention IA, Cortez, or the Tesla. Webb nodded, relief evident in his features. Having a concrete task seemed to steady him, channeling his obvious fear into productive action. He understood the danger they were in, but like Sarah, he had seen the data. Inaction was no longer a moral option. 3 days later, Webb's sister delivered. The metadata from Horizon Automotive Research's corporate filings revealed a pattern of amendments and updates that corresponded precisely to significant events in the Tesla's travel log. Whenever the vehicle had been present at a death scene, the company's records showed activity within the following 72 hours. Someone was updating the shell company's documentation to provide alibis or explanations for the vehicle's movements, constructing a paper trail that would satisfy casual scrutiny. More importantly, the metadata included IP addresses associated with the filing submissions. Most were anonymized through VPN services, but 3 had been submitted from Atlanta locations. Webb traced these addresses to their physical sources and found something that made Sarah's blood run cold. One of them originated from the Atlanta Police Department's headquarters building. They were running their cover-up operations from inside the department itself. The arrogance was staggering, the confidence absolute. Whoever was behind this believed themselves to be untouchable, protected by their position within the very institution tasked with investigating crimes. And given what Sarah had seen in the Tesla's data, their confidence was not unfounded. They had been operating for at least 18 months without attracting official attention, their victims written off as accidents, suicides, or unsolved cases. Sarah found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of her apartment while Max dozed on his bed nearby. She rehearsed scenarios endlessly, gaming out approaches and their consequences. Every path forward seemed to lead through territory controlled by enemies she could not fully identify. Cortez was certainly involved, but he was unlikely to be acting alone. The resources required for these operations, the political protection that prevented investigation, the sophisticated technical capabilities, all suggested a network rather than a single corrupt official. She needed to understand that network before she could dismantle it. and that required getting closer to Cortez himself. The opportunity came 3 weeks into her investigation, wrapped in the mundane packaging of a departmental training exercise. The Atlanta PD conducted quarterly readiness assessments, bringing together officers from various divisions for joint exercises designed to test coordination and communication. Sarah's K-9 unit was scheduled to participate in an assessment focused on building search protocols, and the exercise coordinator was Deputy Chief Raymond Cortez. Sarah studied Cortez's departmental file before the exercise, memorizing details that might prove useful. He was 53 years old, a 30-year veteran of the force who had worked his way up through narcotics and organized crime before his appointment to internal affairs. His record was exemplary on paper, decorated for valor twice, commended for leadership multiple times, never the subject of disciplinary action. He was known as a demanding supervisor who inspired loyalty through competence rather than charisma. The file photograph showed a man with the weathered face of someone who had seen the worst of human nature and decided to fight it. Silver hair cut short, brown eyes set deep beneath heavy brows, a jawline that suggested stubbornness and resolve. Sarah had seen Cortez at departmental events over the years, had exchanged professional pleasantries without any particular impression beyond routine respect. Now, looking at his photograph with new understanding, she searched for some sign of the corruption she knew existed beneath the surface. She found nothing. Cortez looked like exactly what he claimed to be, a dedicated officer who had devoted his life to justice. That was what made him so dangerous. The training exercise took place at an abandoned warehouse complex in the Lakewood district, a sprawling maze of interconnected buildings that provided ideal terrain for search scenarios. Sarah arrived with Max early in the morning, joining approximately 50 other officers who milled around portable command stations while equipment was distributed and briefings delivered. Cortez presided over the proceedings with calm authority, his voice carrying across the staging area without need for amplification. She watched him interact with other officers, noting his body language, his patterns of attention, searching for any deviation from the norm that might indicate awareness of the investigation she was conducting. But Cortez displayed nothing but professional focus, answering questions, reviewing protocols, ensuring that every participant understood their role in the exercise. The scenarios ran throughout the morning, rotating teams through various buildings while evaluators observed and scored performance. Sarah and Max worked through their assigned challenges with the efficiency of long partnership, locating hidden subjects, alerting on concealed materials, demonstrating the capabilities that had made them one of the department's premier K-9 teams. Between scenarios, she positioned herself to observe Cortez, building a profile of his movements and associations. The opportunity she needed came during the lunch break. Cortez stepped away from the command area, walking toward a maintenance building at the edge of the complex. His posture was relaxed, a man simply seeking a moment of privacy during a demanding day. Sarah gave him a 2-minute head start, then followed with Max at her side. She found him standing behind the maintenance building, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but not inaudible. Sarah stopped at the corner, hand dropping to rest on Max's head, signaling silence. The Belgian Malinois settled into stillness, his attention fixed on her rather than the target, trusting her judgment completely. Cortez's words drifted through the still air, fragments of a conversation that made Sarah's heart pound. The bridge was a mistake, he was saying. Whoever left it there compromised the entire operation. We need to verify that nothing was recovered before we proceed. A pause while the person on the other end responded. Then Cortez again, his voice harder. I do not care what the timeline demands. If the data was extracted, we have exposure that no amount of political cover can manage. Find out what that K-9 unit discovered and who they have told. Use whatever resources necessary. Sarah felt ice forming in her chest. He knew. Someone had reported the discovery at the Morrison Street Bridge, had connected it to Sarah's unit, had communicated the threat to Cortez within hours of Webb's analysis beginning. The enemy knew they were being hunted and was preparing countermeasures. She retreated carefully, keeping Max close, retracing her steps to the staging area without triggering whatever surveillance Cortez might have in place. Her mind raced through implications and adjustments. The investigation was no longer simply dangerous. It was an active combat situation where her adversary had identified her and was actively working to eliminate the threat she represented. The training exercise concluded without incident, Sarah performing her required duties while processing the radical shift in her circumstances. She exchanged routine pleasantries with colleagues, accepted compliments on Max's performance, played the role of a satisfied lieutenant wrapping up a successful day. But beneath the surface, she was calculating risks and responses, adapting her approach to the new reality. That evening she met Webb at their secure location. The storage unit feeling even more claustrophobic than usual, she recounted Cortez's conversation, watching Webb's face shift from concern to something approaching panic. He began pacing the narrow space, his technical confidence evaporating under the weight of physical danger. "We have to go to the FBI," he said, "immediately, tonight. We have enough to justify protective custody while they investigate." Sarah shook her head. "We do not know who Cortez's external contacts are. If the FBI is compromised, we walk directly into a trap. And even if they are clean, the moment we make official contact, Cortez will know. He will destroy evidence, eliminate witnesses, disappear into whatever protection network he has established." "Then what do we do?" Webb demanded. "Wait for them to come for us." Max had risen from his blanket, moving to position himself between Sarah and the door, his instincts responding to the tension in the room. Sarah looked at her partner, drawing strength from his steady presence. The dog would fight for her without hesitation, would die for her if necessary. She owed him better than to squander their partnership through panicked decisions. "We accelerate our timeline," Sarah said carefully. "We identify Cortez's network within the next 72 hours and take everything to DA Reese. But we do it smart, using the resources we have without exposing ourselves to direct confrontation." Webb stared at her, searching for something in her expression. What he found seemed to steady him somewhat. His pacing slowed, his breathing normalized. Finally he nodded. "What resources do we have?" Sarah allowed herself a slight smile, feeling the familiar clarity that came with operational planning. "We have access to a surveillance network they do not know we control. We have documentation they believe was never discovered. And we have something they cannot anticipate or counter." "What is that?" Sarah placed her hand on Max's head, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her palm. "We have the best partner in the department, and tomorrow he is going to help us find everyone involved in this conspiracy." The plan Sarah developed that night was audacious enough to make Webb physically uncomfortable, but he recognized the logic beneath its apparent recklessness. Cortez knew that the K-9 unit had discovered something at the Morrison Street Bridge. He would be monitoring Sarah's official activities, watching for signs of investigation or communication with outside agencies. But he would not anticipate that Sarah would use Max's capabilities to conduct covert surveillance operations under the guise of routine duties. The Atlanta PD's K-9 unit conducted regular training exercises throughout the city, scenarios designed to maintain readiness while providing visible deterrence in high-crime areas. These exercises were scheduled through official channels but allowed considerable flexibility in location and timing. Sarah would use this flexibility to position herself near locations associated with Cortez's network, letting Max's senses gather intelligence that no electronic surveillance could match. The first target was the Horizon Automotive Research Office on Peachtree Center Avenue. Sarah scheduled a training exercise at a nearby park, ostensibly practicing crowd control scenarios in the busy downtown environment. The exercise was legitimate, but it positioned her within observation range of the office building's main entrance. Max performed admirably during the public portion of the exercise, demonstrating his skills for onlooking civilians, while Sarah tracked activity at the target location. Over 3 hours, she observed 7 individuals entering or exiting the 14th floor suite, photographing each with a concealed camera disguised as a personal fitness tracker. 3 of the individuals wore the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement, their movements marked by the particular alertness that years of service instilled. 2 others appeared to be civilians, business attire suggesting legal or financial professions. The final 2 were harder to categorize, their deliberate anonymity suggesting operational personnel accustomed to avoiding identification. That evening, Webb ran the photographs through facial recognition systems he had quietly accessed, using methods that would not trigger the monitoring alerts Cortez had presumably established. The results confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the scope of the conspiracy. One of the law enforcement individuals was Captain Marcus Bennett, Cortez's second-in-command at Internal Affairs. Another was Lieutenant Jessica Huang, a 20-year veteran assigned to the department's intelligence unit. The third was Sergeant David Okonkwo, who officially worked in the property room but had previously served under Cortez in the organized crime task force. The civilians were equally significant. One was identified as Howard Strauss, a partner at Strauss and Weaver, one of Atlanta's most prominent law firms, with extensive connections to city government and the business community. The other was Rachel Morrison, a senior official in the mayor's office responsible for liaising with law enforcement. The pattern that emerged was devastating in its implications. This was not simple corruption operating in isolation. This was an organized network spanning law enforcement, legal and political sectors, its members positioned to control information flow, influence investigations, and protect operations from exposure. The Tesla and its black box were merely tools in a larger apparatus designed to eliminate threats to powerful interests while maintaining the facade of legitimate governance. Sarah spent a sleepless night mapping connections and implications. Max curled at the foot of her bed as she worked by the glow of her laptop screen. By dawn, she had identified at least 16 additional individuals who appeared connected to the network based on documented associations with the confirmed members. The conspiracy had tentacles reaching into nearly every significant institution in Atlanta, a cancer that had spread far beyond what she had initially imagined. The scale of the threat raised questions about her original plan. District Attorney Victoria Reese might indeed be clean, her reputation for integrity suggesting resistance to exactly this kind of institutional corruption. But the network Sarah had uncovered was sophisticated enough to have planted operatives in positions designed to neutralize exactly such oversight. How could she know that Reese's office was not compromised? How could she trust that approaching the DA would not simply deliver her investigation into the hands of her enemies? The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing the Tesla's travel data for additional patterns, Webb discovered something that had been obscured by the volume of information they were processing. The vehicle had made multiple visits to a residential address in the Buckhead neighborhood, trips that did not correspond to any of the incidents they had catalogued. The address belonged to Victoria Reese. The discovery was ambiguous enough to permit multiple interpretations. The network might have been conducting surveillance on the DA, monitoring her activities for signs of threat. Alternatively, Reese herself might be connected to the conspiracy, her reputation for integrity merely a carefully constructed cover. Sarah needed to determine which scenario was accurate before proceeding with any approach. She scheduled another training exercise, this time in the affluent Buckhead neighborhood where Reese's residence was located. The exercise focused on residential security scenarios, giving Sarah legitimate reason to survey the area while Max practiced building approaches and perimeter alerts. The DA's home was a substantial Georgian colonial set back from the street behind mature landscaping. Security cameras visible at key positions, suggesting awareness of potential threats. Max's behavior during the approach provided the first significant data point. The Belgian Malinois showed none of the aggressive alertness he had displayed at the Morrison Street Bridge, or when approaching the Horizon Automotive Research Building. His posture was relaxed, professional but not alarmed, suggesting that whatever scents or signals had triggered his response to the Tesla were not present here. If Reese was connected to the network, the connection was not reflected in the chemical signatures that Max could detect. Sarah observed the residence for 2 hours under cover of her exercise, noting patterns of movement and security protocols. Victoria Reese herself emerged briefly to retrieve mail. A tall woman in her early 50s with silver-streaked black hair and the purposeful movements of someone accustomed to demanding schedules. She glanced toward Sarah's position, without apparent concern, offered a brief wave of acknowledgement to the police officer and her impressive K-9 partner, then returned inside. The interaction was unremarkable, but it provided Sarah with crucial information. Reese had not reacted with suspicion or fear to an unexpected police presence near her home. Either she was completely innocent of connection to the network, or she was an exceptionally skilled actor who had maintained her cover even in unplanned circumstances. Sarah's instincts, honed by 15 years of reading suspects and witnesses, suggested the former. That evening, she made a decision that would commit her to an irreversible course. She drafted a secure communication to Victoria Reese, outlining the broad contours of what she had discovered without revealing specific evidence or sources. The message was deliberately vague, providing enough information to convey the seriousness of the situation while protecting the investigation's assets if the communication was intercepted. She sent the message through a secure channel Webb had established, routing it through multiple anonymizing services that would frustrate tracking. Then she waited, Max pressed against her side on the couch of her apartment, both of them listening to the silence with different senses but identical vigilance. The response came 6 hours later, in the dark hours before dawn. 3 words, simple and direct. "Meet me tomorrow." The meeting took place in a location Sarah would never have anticipated. Victoria Reese had specified coordinates that led to a nature preserve in DeKalb County, a sprawling wilderness area that provided absolute privacy from surveillance systems and prying eyes. Sarah arrived with Max at the designated time, finding the district attorney already waiting beside a weathered park bench overlooking a small lake. Reese was alone, dressed in casual clothes that transformed her from imposing prosecutor to ordinary citizen. She watched Sarah approach with an expression that mixed caution with something that might have been hope. Her eyes tracked to Max, and her posture relaxed slightly, as if the dog's presence provided reassurance that words could not. "Lieutenant Collins," Reese said, her voice carrying across the still morning air. "Your message was concerning enough that I am taking significant personal risk by meeting you like this. I assume you have a very good reason." Sarah stopped a few feet away, positioning herself so that Max could observe both the DA and the surrounding terrain. The Belgian Malinois had assumed his professional alertness, scanning the environment for threats while keeping one ear pitched toward the conversation. An autonomous vehicle was discovered on the Morrison Street Bridge 3 weeks ago, Sarah began. Its black box contained navigation data, connecting it to dozens of incidents across Atlanta over the past 18 months. Deaths, disappearances, evidence destruction. The access credentials used to command the vehicle are tied to the Internal Affairs Division of the Atlanta Police Department. Reese's expression did not change, but Sarah saw something shift behind her eyes, a sharpening of attention that suggested the information confirmed suspicions rather than introduced surprises. The DA remained silent, inviting Sarah to continue. I have identified at least 20 individuals connected to what appears to be an organized network operating across law enforcement, legal, and political sectors. Deputy Chief Raymond Cortez appears to be the central law enforcement figure, but he has support from officers in multiple divisions, partners at major law firms, and officials within city government. The network has been eliminating people who threaten powerful interests while using institutional access to prevent investigation. Reese nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the lake. Its surface was perfectly still, reflecting the early morning sky like a mirror. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I have suspected something like this for nearly 2 years, Lieutenant. Bodies that do not add up. Witnesses who vanish or recant, investigations that close prematurely. I have been building my own file, documenting patterns and anomalies, waiting for evidence concrete enough to act upon. Sarah felt a surge of cautious relief. She had gambled correctly. Reese was not part of the conspiracy. She was another hunter, working parallel to Sarah's investigation without either knowing of the other's existence. The Tesla's data provides that evidence, Sarah said. Combined with what you have gathered, we should have enough to move forward with prosecution. Reese turned to face her, and Sarah saw the full weight of prosecutorial experience in her expression. Moving forward is more complex than you realize. Lieutenant, the people we are discussing have resources and connections that extend far beyond Atlanta. If we strike prematurely, if we miss even one significant player, the network will adapt and survive. They will sacrifice whoever is exposed while protecting the core operation, and they will ensure that neither of us is in a position to threaten them again. Max shifted beside Sarah, his attention catching on something in the distance. Both women paused, watching the dog assess whatever had triggered his response. After a moment, he relaxed, satisfied that no immediate threat existed. The interruption served as a reminder of the danger surrounding their conversation. What do you propose? Sarah asked. We pool our resources immediately, Reese replied. Everything you have discovered, everything I have gathered, combined into a comprehensive picture. We identify every member of the network we can reach, map their connections and operations, and develop a prosecution strategy that dismantles the entire structure simultaneously. No warnings, no partial actions that allow adaptation. We hit them all at once, using federal resources to ensure that local political protection cannot interfere. Federal resources, Sarah repeated. You trust the FBI with this? Reese allowed herself a slight smile, the expression carrying no warmth. I trust specific individuals within the FBI, people who have demonstrated their integrity through years of similar operations. This is not my first encounter with institutional corruption, Lieutenant. The city commissioners I prosecuted 3 years ago were connected to networks that reached into federal law enforcement. I learned then how to identify trustworthy allies and how to structure operations that survive compromise attempts. The morning sun had crested the tree line, flooding the preserve with golden light that seemed incongruous with the darkness they were discussing. Sarah felt the warmth on her face, while her mind processed the implications of what Reese was proposing. A full, coordinated strike against the network would require extensive preparation and absolute operational security. Any leak, any hint that such action was coming, would trigger exactly the adaptation Reese had warned against. How long? Sarah asked. How long until we can move? Reese considered the question carefully. If your evidence is as comprehensive as you describe, and if my contacts can mobilize federal support quickly, perhaps 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks will be extremely dangerous for everyone involved. The network will not remain passive while we prepare to destroy them. Sarah looked at Max, who had settled into a comfortable position at her feet, his vigilance maintained even in apparent relaxation. The dog trusted her absolutely, had followed her into danger countless times without hesitation. She owed him the same courage he consistently demonstrated. "Then we work fast and stay alive," Sarah said. "Tell me what you need from me." The next 2 weeks were the most intense of Sarah's career. She maintained her official duties with mechanical precision while spending every available moment supporting the combined investigation. Webb proved invaluable, his technical skills creating secure communication channels and analysis tools that allowed the growing team to coordinate without exposure. Reese's FBI contacts arrived in Atlanta under various covers, establishing a shadow operation that existed parallel to normal law enforcement. The scope of the conspiracy exceeded even Sarah's expanded understanding. As evidence accumulated and interviews were conducted with carefully approached witnesses, the network's full structure emerged. At its center was not Raymond Cortez, but a figure Sarah had never suspected, Chief Harrison himself. The revelation came from an unlikely source. One of the network's civilian members, a financial consultant named Bradley Webb, no relation to Sarah's technical ally, had developed concerns about the direction of operations. The violence had escalated beyond what he had originally signed up for, and he was looking for a way out that did not end with his own disappearance. Reese's team had identified him through financial anomalies and approached him with an offer of immunity in exchange for complete cooperation. Bradley Webb's testimony painted a picture of corruption so comprehensive that it almost defied belief. Chief Harrison had established the network 15 years earlier, originally as a mechanism for controlling the city's drug trade through selective enforcement and protected distribution. Over time, the operation had evolved into a general-purpose instrument for eliminating obstacles to powerful interests, whether those interests were criminal, political, or corporate. The Tesla and its autonomous capabilities represented the latest technological advancement in the network's methods. The vehicle could transport operatives or victims without human driver witnesses, could provide perfect alibis for individuals who were actually present at crime scenes, and could be controlled remotely by operators who never had to approach the actual locations. Cortez had been the primary operator, using his internal affairs position to direct the vehicle, while simultaneously ensuring that any investigations that might expose its activities were quietly terminated. The 47 incidents Sarah had identified in the Tesla's data were merely the Atlanta operations. Similar networks existed in at least 6 other major cities, all coordinated through connections that Harrison had cultivated over decades of law enforcement career. The conspiracy was not merely a local corruption problem. It was a national criminal enterprise operating under the cover of the institutions meant to combat such operations. Sarah absorbed this information during a secure briefing in a federal facility outside Atlanta, her mind struggling to process the scope of what she was learning. Max lay at her feet, apparently dozing, but actually maintaining the low-level alertness that never fully departed during working hours. The dog had no conception of the abstract evil they were confronting, but he understood that his partner was troubled, and his presence offered what comfort his nature allowed. The strike operation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, chosen because multiple high-value targets would be gathered at a monthly coordination meeting held in a secure location that Bradley Webb had identified. The meeting brought together law enforcement, legal, and political members of the network, providing an opportunity to apprehend numerous conspirators simultaneously while minimizing the chance of escape or warning. Sarah was assigned a secondary role in the operation, her K-9 unit officially deployed for building search support while actually positioned to intercept Cortez specifically. The deputy chief was considered extremely dangerous, his years of operational experience making him capable of unpredictable responses. Sarah's rapport with Max and their established tactical capabilities made them ideal for the confrontation that was expected. The morning of the operation dawned grey and cool, a welcome break from the relentless heat that had gripped Atlanta since the discovery at the Morrison Street Bridge. Sarah prepared with the methodical care of someone who had rehearsed these actions thousands of times, checking equipment, reviewing protocols, communicating with Max through the subtle language they had developed together. The dog sensed the heightened stakes, his energy coiled and ready, his focus absolute. The target location was a private conference facility in the Midtown district, a 3-story building that appeared to house corporate meeting spaces, but actually served as a regular gathering point for the network's Atlanta leadership. Federal teams would handle the primary assault, breaching the building and securing the main conference room where the meeting was expected to occur. Sarah's unit would cover the secondary exit, a service entrance that intelligence suggested Cortez might use if the primary assault triggered evacuation protocols. The operation launched at precisely 7:45 in the morning, timed to catch the targets during the initial gathering period when confusion would be maximized. Sarah monitored communications from her position near the service entrance, Max poised beside her with the intensity of a predator awaiting release. The building's front entrance erupted with controlled violence, federal agents executing their breach with professional precision. Radio traffic crackled with updates, primary targets secured, secondary targets responding, resistance in Corridor B, shots fired Corridor B, multiple subjects in custody. The operation was proceeding successfully, the network's leadership falling into custody with the systematic inevitability that proper planning produced. Then Sarah heard the words she had been expecting. Subject Cortez has reached service exit. Repeat, Subject Cortez heading for service exit. She moved before the transmission finished, Max flowing beside her with silent efficiency. The service entrance opened into an alley that connected to a parking structure approximately 50 meters away. If Cortez reached the structure, he would have access to vehicles that could facilitate escape. Sarah positioned herself to intercept, weapon drawn, voice calm, as she challenged the figure emerging from the building. Deputy Chief Cortez, Atlanta Police, do not move. Cortez froze in the doorway, his expression shifting as he registered who was blocking his escape. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something that might have been grudging respect. "The Collins woman," he said, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen the end approaching and had run out of options. "It is over," Sarah replied. "Federal teams have secured the building. Your network is being dismantled as we speak. There is nowhere to go." Cortez's hand moved toward his weapon, a reflexive gesture that Max responded to instantly. The Belgian Malinois surged forward with the explosive speed that made the breed legendary in tactical applications, his body a tan and black missile aimed at the perceived threat. Cortez reacted with the instincts of a trained operator, his weapon clearing the holster just as Max's jaws clamped onto his forearm. The gun discharged once, the bullet sparking off concrete somewhere to Sarah's left. Then the weapon was falling, Cortez was falling, Max was bearing him to the ground with the implacable efficiency of a perfectly trained protection dog. Sarah closed the distance in seconds, kicking the fallen weapon away and applying restraints while Max maintained his grip with patient determination. It took several commands to convince Max to release. The dog was wired from the confrontation, his blood singing with the ancient predator energy that humans had spent millennia channeling into service. But he responded to Sarah's voice as he always did, yielding to her judgment, accepting that the fight was over, even as his instincts screamed for continued engagement. Cortez lay on the ground, his arm bleeding from Max's bite, his expression shifting from rage to something that looked almost like relief. "It was coming apart anyway," he said, his voice strained with pain. "Harrison got too greedy, brought in too many people, took too many risks. The Tesla was supposed to be untraceable. He bought it from a government surplus auction without checking the black box capabilities." Sarah did not respond, recognizing the confession for what it was. Cortez would tell his story many times in the coming months, to federal prosecutors, to grand juries, to trial courts. This moment in the alley was merely the first iteration, the initial release of secrets that had festered for years. Backup arrived within minutes, federal agents taking custody of Cortez, while Sarah submitted to the routine procedures that followed any officer involved shooting. Max was examined by a veterinary specialist attached to the operation, cleared of injury, and allowed to remain with Sarah during the processing. The dog seemed to understand that something significant had concluded, his manner subdued but satisfied, the contentment of a predator after a successful hunt. The full scope of the network's takedown became clear over the following days. 23 individuals were arrested in Atlanta alone, including Chief Harrison, Deputy Chief Cortez, Captain Bennett, Lieutenant Huang, and Sergeant Okonkwo from the police department. Civilian arrests included Howard Strauss, Rachel Morrison, Bradley Webb, and numerous others who had profited from the network's operations. Federal coordination resulted in simultaneous arrests in 6 other cities, rolling up connected operations before word of the Atlanta strike could trigger flight or evidence destruction. District Attorney Victoria Reese held a press conference announcing the prosecutions, her careful words outlining the scope of the conspiracy without revealing the investigative methods that had exposed it. Sarah watched the broadcast from her apartment. Max sprawled across the couch beside her, his head resting on her leg. The recognition she had earned would remain private, known only to the small circle of investigators who had risked everything to achieve this outcome. That anonymity suited her perfectly. The departmental restructuring that followed consumed the subsequent months. With Harrison's arrest and Cortez's cooperation with federal prosecutors, the Atlanta PD's leadership was effectively decapitated. New appointments were made, internal investigations launched, policies reformed to prevent the kind of institutional capture that had allowed the network to flourish. Sarah was promoted to captain, offered command of a new unit focused specifically on public corruption and institutional oversight. She accepted, recognizing the opportunity to continue the work that had begun with a mysterious vehicle on an abandoned bridge. Max adapted to their new circumstances with the flexibility that defined his breed. He continued to serve as Sarah's partner, his skills deployed now against targets who wore suits rather than street clothes, whose crimes were measured in documents rather than physical violence. The dog did not understand the abstract nature of their new opponents, but he understood Sarah's intensity, her focus, her determination to follow each investigation wherever it led. That understanding was enough. 1 year after the Morrison Street Bridge discovery, Sarah returned to the location that had initiated everything. The Tesla had long since been processed as evidence, its data extracted and analyzed and submitted to courts across the country. The bridge itself remained abandoned, its rusted guardrails and cracked surface unchanged by the events it had witnessed. Max walked beside her as she crossed the span, his nails clicking against concrete that still bore faint traces of forensic marking paint. The industrial canal below continued its sluggish flow, carrying whatever pollution the defunct factories had deposited over decades of neglect. Nothing about the location suggested significance. It was simply another piece of urban decay, forgotten by everyone except those who had been transformed by what was discovered there. Sarah stopped at the center of the bridge, approximately where the Tesla had been positioned when they first arrived. Max sat beside her, his attention drifting across the empty landscape without finding anything that triggered his professional instincts. The immediate danger was over, the network dismantled, its members facing justice through the systems they had once corrupted. But Sarah knew that corruption was never truly defeated. It was managed, contained, pushed back temporarily while waiting for opportunity to resurface. Somewhere in Atlanta, in cities across the country, new networks were forming, new schemes developing, new threats emerging that would require the kind of vigilance she had demonstrated. The work would never be finished because the human capacity for exploiting power would never be exhausted. She reached down and stroked Max's head, feeling the familiar warmth of his fur beneath her fingers. The dog looked up at her with the absolute trust that had defined their partnership, his eyes reflecting the grey morning light. He did not understand the philosophical weight of the moment, but he understood that his partner was contemplating something significant. He would wait, as long as necessary, for her to reach whatever conclusion she was seeking. Sarah looked out across the industrial district, the abandoned factories and empty warehouses stretching toward the downtown skyline in the distance. The city she had sworn to protect was flawed and struggling and frequently disappointing, but it was also capable of producing people like Victoria Reese, like Marcus Webb, like the countless officers who served honestly despite the corruption that had infected their leadership. That capacity for integrity was worth defending, worth the risk she had taken and would continue to take. She turned and walked back toward her vehicle, Max falling into step beside her with the easy coordination of long practice. There were cases waiting, investigations that required her new authority, threats that demanded the unique capabilities she and her partner provided. The Morrison Street Bridge would fade back into obscurity, its moment of significance concluded. But Sarah would remember. She would remember the abandoned vehicle gleaming incongruously against decay, the data that had revealed systematic evil, the weeks of danger and discovery that had followed. She would remember the feel of Max's shoulder against her leg as they confronted Cortez, the explosive violence of his response, the relief of justice finally achieved. Most importantly, she would remember the lesson that the investigation had taught her. Corruption thrived in darkness, in the spaces where oversight failed and accountability was compromised. Her job, her purpose, was to be the light that exposed those spaces, the persistent pressure that prevented darkness from spreading. It was exhausting work, often thankless, occasionally dangerous. But watching Max bound toward the vehicle with the joy of a dog anticipating their next adventure, Sarah could not imagine doing anything else. This was who she was, what she was meant for. A hunter of those who betrayed their oaths, a guardian of systems that protected the innocent, a partner to the most loyal creature she had ever known. The autonomous car's black box had revealed what corruption could accomplish when given technological tools and institutional protection. It had shown the ruthless efficiency with which powerful interests could eliminate obstacles while maintaining the appearance of legitimate operation. But it had also revealed the fatal flaw in such systems, the assumption that technology alone could provide perfect security. The network had not anticipated Max. They had not accounted for a dog's instincts. Honed over thousands of years of partnership with humans, capable of detecting wrongness that no sensor could identify. They had not expected that an animal's response to a seemingly ordinary vehicle would initiate the investigation that destroyed them. Sarah smiled as she opened the vehicle door for Max, watching him leap inside with familiar enthusiasm. Technology had enabled the conspiracy, but something far older had defeated it. The bond between human and dog, forged in prehistoric darkness when both species were learning to survive together, had proven stronger than encrypted protocols and autonomous systems. It was fitting somehow. Justice did not require perfection, merely persistence, the willingness to follow instincts when logic provided no guidance, the courage to act when evidence suggested overwhelming opposition, the faith that truth could not be permanently suppressed, no matter how sophisticated the mechanisms of concealment. Max settled into his traveling position, tongue lolling happily, eyes bright with anticipation of whatever came next. Sarah started the engine, pulled away from the bridge, and headed toward the city that still needed them. The work continued,